Snowed yesterday. Snowed about 5 inches, and it's about -3 degrees right now Fahrenheit, which is about like -20 Celsius. So I'm gonna shovel so it's easy to park whenever I leave next. I wanted to talk today about the 4% rule and the big problem I have with it. Ideally, it makes plenty of sense. You withdraw 4% of your money each year. You get a certain amount of money accumulated and you retire and you withdraw 4% of your money each year. And even though you're selling shares, the value of those shares increases because the stock market increases. In an ideal world, it works. Let me show you that first. Okay, 4% rule, numbers heavy. Get ready for this. First, I want to show you the column headings of this model. That I'm going to show you more in a second, but the column headings first. So there's a hypothetical person who's considering, retiring young, retiring in the near future. So there's going to be his age, also in this, the year. And I'm going to pretend like he just has one position in his portfolio. He has a mutual fund that tracks the S&P 500. So how many shares of that mutual fund does he own? And what is the price of that mutual fund? Therefore, what is the value of his portfolio? This will just be the product of these two columns. Multiply share quantity times share price, and we'll get the value of his entire portfolio. Also, he needs to liquidate some dollars every year in order to pay all of his bills. He's going to be retiring and just living off of his portfolio. So he's going to liquidate 4% of the total value of his portfolio each year. That's the 4% rule. Also, in order to liquidate that many dollars, how many shares does he need to sell? So he needs a certain amount of dollars. Divide that by the share price, and you'll get how many shares he needs to sell in order to liquidate that many dollars. So let's look at the first row. So imagine it's like the early 90s, this guy's in his early 30s, and he's thinking, I might be able to retire soon. If I were able to retire in 1996, how much money would I need in order to do that? So he's thinking 1996, what's the cost of goods going to be? And he thinks he needs $20,000 in order to retire in 1996. Okay, let's work backwards. 4% rule, if he's going to take out $20,000 from his portfolio, 20,000 divided by 0.04, 20,000 divided by 4%, 500,000. So he's thinking, if I could accumulate $500,000 by the year 1996, then I could withdraw 4% of that. First year, that's $20,000. That will cover all my bills, and I could retire. So I need to save $500,000 by the year 1996. And it turns out he does that. Every time he has money left over, he buys more and more shares of this mutual fund that tracks the S&P 500. By the year 1996, he manages to get 5,000 shares. And in the year 1996, the share price of this mutual fund is $100. So 5,000 shares multiplied by $100, the value of his portfolio is $500,000. He's going to liquidate 4% of that. That's the 4% rule. In order to liquidate $20,000, 20,000 divided by $100 per share, he needs to sell 200 shares. He sells 200 shares at $100 each. That's $20,000 that he has liquidated. Okay, second row. It's 1 year later. He's 36 now. It's 1997, and he just sold 200 shares to liquidate some money to pay bills in 1996. So he has 200 fewer shares. He started off with 5,000 shares. Now he has 4,800. But, and this is actual data, the share price column is actual data on how the S&P 500 was moving. So in 1997, the S&P increased 31%. So instead of $100 per share, his mutual fund that tracks the S&P 500 has increased 31%. It's $131 per share. So even though he has fewer shares, the value of each share is greater. And if you multiply his 4,800 shares by $131 per share, the value of his portfolio has increased to $628,800. And 4% rule, you withdraw 4% of that, so he's going to liquidate $25,152. How many shares is that? 25,152 divided by the $131 per share. He needs to sell 192 shares in order to liquidate 4% of his portfolio. Okay, and he does this, and he keeps doing this. And even though the dot-com bubble bursts in 2000, and that lingers for a while, and then there's a housing crash in '08, and that lingers for a while, this works. Each year, he liquidates 4% of his portfolio, and you could see through his age 58 year, he's doing fine. That's as many rows as I could fit on one screen. And like I said, this column is exact data of the S&P 500. In 1997, increased 31%, increased again in 98, increased again in 99, and then the dot-com bubble made a decrease in the year 2000 and 2001 and 2002, and this is actual data. Here is age 59 through age 82. Now I can only use actual data through 2024 because the other years haven't happened yet. So from 2025 on, I just said the S&P increased 10% each year because that's what's been happening lately. But you see, this guy's not in any trouble. He started off, if you remember, with $500,000, the value of his portfolio. At the top of this column, he's 59 years old, and the value of his portfolio is about $900,000. At the bottom of this column, the guy is 82 years old, and the value of his portfolio is over $3 million. So things work out in this ideal 4% rule scenario.
All right, got the snow brushed off the car. Now I just have to shovel around it. But the problem with I just showed you that ideal example. The problem is you can't just withdraw 4% of your money. That's great when the value of your portfolio goes up year to year. But any year where the market goes down and the value of your portfolio is smaller than it was the previous year, if you're just withdrawing money as a function of the value of your portfolio, 4% every year, that means some years you'll be withdrawing less money than the year before. Well, the people who decide the prices of things don't care if the market went up or down, if your portfolio went up or down. So you're going to have to pay slightly more in expenses every single year. The inflation rate since like 1960 is almost 4% a year. So even if your portfolio value drops $100,000, you can't just withdraw less money. Oh, 4% rule. I'm withdrawing less money this year and I'm managing to live on that somehow. No. The money you withdraw needs to be a function of the cost of living increases. That's my big problem with the 4% rule. Let me show you now.
Okay, so I don't have a problem with the first year under the, ideal 4% rule scenario. This is what I showed you already, but it's 1996. This guy knew he would need $20,000 to pay all his bills in 1996. And he's thinking, okay, if I get to $500,000, I liquidate 4% of that, and I get my $20,000 to pay all my bills. And it happens. He gets his 5,000 shares at $100 each. He gets his $500,000. He liquidates $20,000, which required selling 200 shares. Okay, that's fine. My problem with the 4% rule is the amount of dollars you're liquidating is a function of the value of your portfolio. You're always liquidating 4% of the value of your portfolio. When things are going well, when the S&P is increasing, that's not a problem. So let me show you this again. 1996, the guy needs $20,000. Okay. Now, these first 4 years all went like perfectly. The S&P kept increasing, and the value of his portfolio kept increasing, and each year he was liquidating a little more money because he's always liquidating 4% of his portfolio. So when his portfolio value always increases, he's always liquidating a little more money, and you're pretty much going to need a little more money than you did the year before in order to pay your bills. So in the first 4 years, things were great, but then the dot-com bubble burst in the year 2000. And this is what I don't understand. You can't just be withdrawing X percent of your portfolio, because in this example, in 1999, the guy withdrew $35,300. Okay, how is it taking $35,300 in order to live in 1999, and somehow you're getting by with only $30,500 in the year 2000? How are you getting by on less money? The market went down, yeah, the dot-com bubble burst, yeah, the value of your portfolio decreased, but the price of goods is just going to go up anyway. So this is what it should be. First year, the same thing. I have no problem with the first year. But this column, how many dollars you're liquidating, should not be a function of the value of your portfolio. It should just go up to keep up with inflation. Now, I think there are ways around inflation, and the number you'll hear on the news isn't quite as severe as the number that applies to most people. But going back to 1960, the average inflation has been 3.8%. So the liquidate dollars column, if we want to start out at needing $20,000 in 1996, fine. But it should always increase by 3.8% to keep up with inflation. So 20,000, add 3.8% to that, and in the second year of this guy's retirement, he should think he needs $20,760. 1 year later, add another 3.8% to that. Year 3 of this guy's retirement, he should be looking to require $21,549. Year 4 of this guy's retirement, again, increase this liquidate dollars column by another 3.8%, and he should need $22,368. These numbers, every number in this column is 3.8% greater than the number that came before it. I don't care what the value of your portfolio is. You have bills, they're going to increase slightly every year. You're going to need a little more money every year. Just because the market goes down doesn't mean you don't need as much money as the year before. So here we go. 2000, the dot-com bubble bursts, and for the first time, this guy's share price of his mutual fund that's tracking the S&P 500 decreases. The S&P decreased in the year 2000. The value of his portfolio decreased. It was about 900,000. It decreases to about 790,000. But he still needs slightly more money than he needed the year before. That's just paying bills, paying for things, inflation, and he requires more shares in order to do that. So that's the toll it takes. The 4% rule has a problem in down years because even though the value of your portfolio goes down, you still need to liquidate more dollars than the previous year, and it takes a lot of shares in order to do that. So same thing, the dot-com bubble lasted for 3 years. Things kept going down. So in 2001, same thing. Market went down, but this guy still needs a little more money. 2002, market went down again. This guy still needed a little more money, though. You could see at the beginning things were going perfectly. He was liquidating fewer and fewer shares in order to pay for anything. Then in the down years, he needed to liquidate more and more shares in order to pay everything, and these years would prove catastrophic. So if you want to look at the rest of everything I could fit on one page, things look okay, from when this guy's 35 to 58. But now I show you the second page when this guy's 59 through 77, and he just runs out of money. When he's 76 years old, he only has 4 shares left. He only has about $10,000 left, but he needs to liquidate $92,000 in order to live. Those down years that required him to liquidate, to sell so many more shares than he expected, were too costly, and he couldn't overcome it.
Oh, ready for me? All right, so you need to withdraw more money than the year before, always, even when you have a down year in the market. That causes big problems. One of the ways to avoid those problems is use the same methodology, but not 4%. A smaller percent would fix that. I ran the exact same model using the 3% rule. Check that out.
Okay, everything the same here, except instead of the 4% rule, we're doing the 3% rule. So it's going to require more dollars accumulated in order to retire. So still age 35 person in 1996, he still knows, the cost of goods in 1996. He's going to need $20,000. But under the 3% rule, that means he needs to accumulate about $660,600. Then liquidate 3% of that, gets him his $20,000. So he keeps buying and buying and buying shares in this mutual fund that tracks the S&P 500. Instead of 5,000 shares, he gets to 6,666. That's important. Share price, $100. So that's how he gets to the value of the portfolio, $666,600. And he could liquidate his $20,000 by selling 200 shares. Okay, so we look at all the good years up until the dot-com bubble bursts. So His share quantity only decreases. That's what's going to happen when you're selling shares to liquidate your money. But the S&P is only increasing in this time period. The value of his portfolio is only increasing. And our liquidate dollars column makes sense. Started off at $20,000 and it's increasing by 3.8% each year to match inflation. It's a function of inflation. It's not a function of the value of this guy's portfolio. So he's liquidating fewer and fewer shares while things are going well. Then things go poorly. The dot-com bubble bursts and the S&P has a down year, 4 years in a row. He still needs a little more money every year. But because he did the 3% rule, not the 4% rule, things are okay. So you see the S&P was just decreasing for a while. The value of his portfolio, therefore, was decreasing. Still needed a little more money each year because the cost of goods increases, and he was liquidating, selling more and more shares. But he did the 3% rule, so he started off with a lot more. He didn't just start off with 5,000 shares, he started off with 6,666. So in these few years where he needs to liquidate a lot more shares than expected, it's not destroying him. And if you want to look at the rest of this first page, things are fine. In '08, the housing crash happened. That was also a poor time for your portfolio, but he was able to survive this. One interesting thing to note in this column, the value of his portfolio, it reaches its peak in 1999, 1.2 million. And if you look all the way at the bottom, in 2019, it still hasn't fully recovered yet. The dot-com bubble burst. It went down from 1.2 million in 1999 and never quite came all the way back. It takes more than 20 years for the value of his portfolio to come back up to 1.2 million, but it's just something interesting. It's not something to be concerned about. He was able to liquidate more and more dollars each year and pay for all of his bills. And here's the second page, age 59 through age 84, and you see that first number in the value column. The value of his portfolio got back to that 1.2 million number. So it took 21 years, but the value of his portfolio did get back to 1.2 million. And if you look at the bottom, it just keeps increasing. So doing the 3% rule, not the 4% rule, he started off with so many more shares, 6,666 instead of 5,000, that when those down years happened, which requires selling a lot more shares than you have been, a lot more shares than expected, it didn't kill this plan. He had enough shares, and he was able to have enough of a cushion that down years didn't destroy him. 3% rule worked, 4% rule didn't.
This was the big one. I actually prefer the icy stuff to the fluffy stuff because it requires more. It's like going to the weight room. So, cleared out plenty. Almost done. Got to do a little in front of the car, but it's mostly behind the car. There you go. So I want to say that if you're going to retire at a traditional age, I wouldn't be worried about this. In that second model, if you remember, the guy retires at 35, he uses the 4% rule, he has those down years, he needs to withdraw more money every year to pay for the cost of living, and the money lasted 40 years. It's not like it ran out in like 3.5 years. The money lasted 40. So if you were going to retire at age 55, age 60, I wouldn't worry about it. Also, if you're going to retire at those ages and have Social Security, which I'm not confident it'll exist in the near future, but it does for now. If you have a pension, you also have income in your retirement. I wouldn't worry about it. I'd only worry about this for people retiring early, very far away from Social Security, if it's going to exist when you're in your 60s, and no pension. So you're like really 100% reliant on your investments and just withdrawing the money you've accumulated. You could run out of shares if you don't understand what's going on behind the 4% rule. So I would first I would just understand what's going on, and I would do the 3% rule, the 2% rule. It will require more money to start, so you're gonna have to work a few more years than you wanted, but the 4% rule with data, I had like 30 years of actual data and then some estimates in these models past the year 2025 because it hasn't happened yet. But I would be worried about retiring very early and running out of money. 4% is just too much to start with. After that first year, the dollars you're liquidating is a function of the previous year. You need to account for inflation, but starting at 4% that first year of retirement is just too much. I would be worried about just having no money before you perish. So just wanted to point that out. And if it hasn't been clear, I've been like trying to come up with 1 or 2 finance type videos each month. Not very regimented yet, but I'll see if I can come up with more ideas and continue this. And remember, rice is a spoon food.